Hi everyone, Heather Smith here, your Australian Federation Party candidate for Page. Listen, I've been down the paddock today, and it's getting around the cows. I haven't been down the farm for ages. It's kind of just been self-managing, but it's a good place for me to reflect. I often let ideas distill as I go around, and one of the things I want to speak about is the lack of genuine knowledge and experience we have on the floor of Parliament these days, and how that affects us as everyday people, because it's expressing in the most perverse way in our everyday life at the moment. And it's one of the reasons I'm standing, because me as a agriculturalist and as someone who believes in environmental stewardship, and just as an Australian everyday person living on a low income and a modest lifestyle in a rural and regional community, I feel like there's no one on the floor of Parliament that effectively understands what that's like and what are the practical implications and what are the structures and support I need. So it's not good to have career politicians in place. They haven't lived as everyday Australians live. It's not good to have a whole bunch of lawyers in place. They haven't lived as everyday Australians have lived, and they don't think like everyday Australians. They think in terms of litigation and all of those legal speak, whereas what we need is actual policy and strategy that's built around the lived Australian experience. So, and what I feel in particular is the way the numbers fall. We don't have enough country people, bush people, farming people, earth people in Parliament, raising that voice from a point of knowledge and experience and understanding. And there is a difference between opinion and knowledge. We're getting increasing input from urban centres around green issues or environmental issues, and they're issues that generally would affect someone who owns land, but it's influenced by opinions of people who don't own land. And that's not the way to build effective policy. So the practical experience, okay, so where's that just bowling us for six at the moment? It's actually bowling us for six in our agricultural policy, our drought policy, and our disaster policy. And it's patently obvious at the moment in our disaster policy that we don't have agriculturalists, particularly small-scale agriculturalists or startup agriculturalists or coastal fringe agriculturalists in Parliament effectively advocating for real issues and real experiences for those groups. We're pretty good at looking after our broadacre neighbours further west, the pastoral industry, sheepies, the beef pastoral industry, and also the broadacre cropping industries. They've got big industry bodies. We're not too bad on halt, but in the conventional system. But if you are, like this area is, a smaller agricultural scale where lifestyle is strongly tied, off-farm income is strongly tied, there's a huge opportunity for low food mile, niche, market garden, integrated type production systems that can provide a good stream of supportive income, or provide a career path in terms of knowledge development and maybe some innovation and new systems like syntropic farming. We don't really have effective policy around enabling that to thrive, and it's a missed opportunity in Page. We have a good climate, good soils. We can grow everything from bananas to apples. In terms of climatic range, it's really quite diverse, or because we've got so many microclimates. One valley is different from the other. The bottom of the valley is different from the hill or the terrace. So we've got huge opportunity to diversify our productivity here, and we're right on the edge of Brisbane, like this mass population who are wanting high ethics, high welfare food that is produced locally with a low food footprint. And we have some of the best farmers markets out there. We really, really are spoilt in the Northern Rivers for all of that kind of extraordinary produce. The Nimbin markets I was at the other day, and I was amazed at the quality of some of the produce available at the Nimbin markets, because this has been a diabolical season to try and look after cattle or raise livestock of any type, or indeed grow food. Any time of green leafy vegetables and things like that. That's incredibly difficult to do in the kind of wet season we've just had this year. And so for someone to turn up at those markets with produce that was picture perfect, I walked away and thought about it. I thought, that is skill. That is incredible skill, and it was organic as well. So to produce produce at that level that is organic is an exceptional knowledge base and understanding of production systems and plant nutrition and management, and also potentially also holding to a standard that you don't present anything less than the best food to your customers. Now, what's not to be proud of in that? What's not to support? What's not to champion locally and internationally in terms of those things? It's a huge opportunity. But we're faced with a situation where, with this recent flood event, those same producers are potentially, because it may not be their primary income, actually really struggling to get out of their properties because they can't access any funds to fix their roads. They've got bridges washed away. They've got they've got machinery that might have got flooded. So now they're doing all sorts of workarounds. And I was speaking to a pork producer down at Grafton or near Grafton yesterday, and he is finding himself in a position where he is, fairly early in the startup phase of his pork business. He only started the venture in 2016, and we had Cyclone Debbie in 2017. We went into a drought period through 18, 19, 20, but at the same time as that, being a pork producer, he's dependent on grain prices and grain coming in from further west. And the drought out west actually started in about 2012. So even as he started his enterprise, he was dealing with a grain scarcity issue and a grain pricing issue. And, he did his numbers and based on certain things, that was fine. But then come the end of 2019, he had fires to deal with. And he actually, between grain prices and the fire risk and the drought itself, he actually halved his sow unit. So, only a few years into building an enterprise up to a point of commercial reality, he had to actually pull up his plans and halve. And that was a responsible thing to do for him as a land steward, and also simply because his off-farm income could not support the extraordinary grain prices at the time. So he really needed to, wind that business back just as it was getting to its feet. Then, of course, COVID came along, and so just as we got the 2020 rain and things started to improve and there was a grain crop potentially in the offing and grain prices were going to come down, he then got hit with a lot of his wholesalers no longer taking pork because the restaurants were closed and the cafes were closed. So there was no demand for pork. So once again, he's selling down his herd. And that's no fault of his. He wasn't responsible for the drought. He wasn't responsible for the grain prices. He wasn't responsible for the shutdowns associated with COVID that actually gutted his market, both price-wise and demand-wise. That was a government interference. And come out of that, or still partially be in that, because he says that portion of his business never recovered, then to be hit with the floods. And have all his roads and infrastructure washed out, so he can no longer traffic feed in the way he needs to. He can no longer get pigs to market the way he needs to. And that investment, those capital infrastructure improvements, are all bigger than a off-farm wage can actually help. He's still got an off-farm wage to run his family, school his children, pay his mortgage. That wage does all the things that a normal wage does, and it was trying to establish a brand new agricultural enterprise in some of the most challenging conditions that Australia has ever seen. And he is not eligible for help, neither as a small business nor as a primary producer, because he doesn't meet the 51% rule, and the small business stuff says you must have the funds to go and pay those invoices before they'll even assess it and let you know. So no small business can, or very few small businesses, can afford to expend $50,000 not knowing if that money will come back into their cash flow. So we've missed the mark on so many levels in that conversation just around that one primary producer. And this has bothered me for years. So I used to work in the Rural Adjustment Authority in Queensland. We were involved in some of our disaster responses up there. And the same issues were endemic in how this disaster funding worked. It was quick to be announced, slow to be delivered, impossibly slow to assess and deliver the funds. The criteria were often more about elimination than support. And it was often inadequate. For the hoops you had to jump through, it actually didn't necessarily help a great deal. So this is not a new problem. It's a problem we've always had, and we really need people who are committed, both in Parliament and in our bureaucracy, to comprehending and understanding the knock-on effects of what that paper shuffling process actually achieves or doesn't achieve. And if I ever get into a position where I can manipulate this stuff, I'm going to put some accountability on our bureaucratic chain to say, what are your delivery goals? What are your delivery timeframes? What's your dropout rate, acceptable dropout rate going to be? Because they don't need benchmarks around motherhood statements of happy workplaces. They need benchmarks and targets around appropriate level of support provided to the taxpayer through the programs as they were intended. That's what needs to happen. We need a bureaucratic accountability for those types of things. And I'm going to say we actually need to resource those people to do that job properly. I'm tired of ringing the New South Wales RAA, and I know they're state and we're in federal, but there's so many collaborative projects in this kind of space between state and federal funding buckets that it needs to be talked about as a collective. I'm waiting to get information, waiting to get assessments done. I've been through those hoops myself as a startup primary producer. None of these problems are foreign to me. I've experienced all of them and been rejected on the same grounds. But this is the experience of a lot of primary producers across the Northern Rivers, and it is absolutely not good enough.